Hey guys, in this lesson I want to go ahead and talk about graphing the tangent function. So we've been doing cosine and sine, and tangent is graphed using the unit circle as well. The thing with tangent, you have to remember it's a definition of sine divided by the cosine. So that's a little bit different. So what we have to do is we have to pick some points that are easy enough where we can go ahead and graph, because we're going to be dividing sine over the cosine. And if you notice here, the easiest points are going to be these corner points. Because if you notice here, 0 divided by 1 is 0. Great. Okay. But then also you notice something here when we get to pi over 2. 1 divided by 0, okay, that's undefined because you cannot divide by 0. So what ends up happening at positive pi over 2 and negative pi over 2 here, you have these asymptotes. Okay, these borderlines that are undefined because tangent you can't divide by 0. Okay, the other thing I want you to see is look at here at pi over 4. These are the coordinates on the unit circle, and when we divide sine divided by the cosine, we end up with 1 because you're dividing this guy by this guy. So by the time I get to pi over 4, I should be at the amplitude, or what we call the fake amplitude, I guess you could say. And the same thing over here with negative pi over 4. Okay, so remember, because this guy, the unit circle can open backwards as well, like this. So this is actually negative pi over 4, and that would give us negative 1. So what you have is you have these asymptotes, and then you have these 3 points here that you would graph to help you with the tangent function. Okay, and we would go all the way around the unit circle, right? Just continue following it. But the parent function is developed here in the middle, in the center. And the way to develop that is you have to the right, which is the positive, and then to the left, which is the negative of the unit circle. So we would be using just from pi over 2 all the way to negative pi over 2. So this half of the circle, you can think about it. Okay, it may look a little confusing, but the more we do it, it'll make sense. So let's go ahead and see if we can do some of these. All right, and we'll just try to keep it the same, use the same steps as we did with sine and cosine. So this is our graph, right, that we have to do. So we start off with the midline. The midline, the middle of the graph, is this number here, okay, is 1. Cool. So then we would put a 1 right here. Here's our point, okay, and then we would go up, you know, and then down from there. Our amplitude is the number that's in front of the tangent, which would be a 2. Okay, cool. And then the bigger this number is, the more it's going to stretch it out. And then the period is pi over the value of b, whatever's in front of the x. Now you notice it's pi, it's not 2 pi like sine and cosine. And that's because if you think about it, from negative pi to positive pi, you have 1 pi. That's a distance of 1 pi. It's not 2 pi. We're only using half of the unit circle. And that's why we're using pi. Okay. So what we do is we take pi divided by whatever's in front of the x, which is a 4. So that means from here to here has to be pi over 4 units. That's the whole cycle. Okay, well, how do we do that? Normally, we would take our period and divide it by 4, right? Because there's 4 quadrants, 4 sections. But what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to cut it in half. Why? Because half of the graph is going to be on the right, and the other half is going to be on the left. So we take pi over 4, you're going to get pi over 8. So positive pi over 8 is on the right, negative pi over 8 is on the left. So now that we have those, we would go ahead and find these halfway between those. Okay, so we would find halfway between this guy. Well, how do you find this guy? Well, you multiply this guy by 1/2. Okay. So that would give you pi over 16, because that's the halfway point. Same thing over here. This would be negative pi over 16 because it's symmetrical. Well, that helps me out a lot because now I have my asymptotes. I have my points, my 4 sections. And now all I have to do is plot these guys. Okay, so we start off with the midline here. So from here, all we do is you go up 2 units to the amplitude. All right, so by the time I get here, it's go 1, 2. So I'm right there. And then from here, you go down to 1, 2, right? So from here, 1, 2, right there. And that's it. And then you want to go ahead and just connect it with a smooth curve. And this guy is a bit stretched out, and that's okay. Goes here. And there it is. Okay, guys. Now, what about a horizontal shift? Well, if you notice, we take whatever's inside of our parentheses here, the 4x, set it equal to 0. We saw we get x equals 0. There's no horizontal shift. So that means this guy's not going to be moving left to right, which is great. Okay. So let's go see if we can do a few more of these. Okay. Always start off with your toolbar here that you can use. What's your midline? Well, there's no number here. Okay, cool. So that means it's 0. We're going to keep it in the middle. All right, what's my amplitude? 2. Sometimes your professor, of course, will do, absolute value, and that's okay. Pi over b, what's in front of the x? It's a 3. Okay, so it's pi over 3. So that means from beginning to end is going to be pi over 3. Okay, well, what do? Remember, we're not going to divide it this time by 4. We're going to divide it in half. So we're going to multiply it by 3. Okay, multiply times 1/2 is going to give us pi over 6. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to have pi over 6 on the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative pi over 6 on the left. Good, so now we're going to have this just like this. Okay. And there it is. Nice. So now what do? I got to find halfway of this point. So what's halfway of this? Well, we multiply this guy by 1/2. So that becomes pi over 12. That means this guy over here is going to be negative pi over 12. Okay. And a lot of students think that tangent is actually a lot easier to graph than the other two, than sine and cosine. And for some people it is. Let's go ahead and find our horizontal shift just because we need to find that. So 3x is in the middle. All right, set that equal to 0, and that's nice for us because that means x is equal to 0. So there's no horizontal shift. That's nice. All right, cool. Now what we have to do, we have to go ahead and start graphing. Okay, so where do we start? Our midline. What's our midline? Well, in this case, it's just going to be right here in the middle. And then all I do is I need my other 2 points. Well, what do? Amplitude. So from here, I got to go to the amplitude. By the time I get to here, it has to be at the amplitude from the midline. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. So it's 2, right? So let's say that's 1, and that's 2. Let's say that's 1, and that's 2. So by the time I get to here, I'm right there at the amplitude. Same thing, you go down to 1, 2, that'll be negative 2. And you go 1, 2, so it should be right here. Okay, and then you curve it, smooth line, starts curving, and there it is. Okay, and you can go ahead and verify, right, just like we did with sine and cosine. Pi over 12, when I plug in pi over 12, I should get a 2. So this point here, so it's pi over 12 comma 2. That means when I put pi over 12 into the x, I should get 2. Okay, so let's figure that out. Let's see, 2 times tangent of 3 times pi over 12. Well, 3 pi over 12, when I reduce it, that's the same thing as pi over 4. And what is pi over 4? Well, if you remember pi over 4, remember it's sine over cosine. Sine divided by cosine, that's a 1. So this becomes a 1. So that means 2 times 1, the answer is 2. So hey, we did it right. Okay. Let's see if we can do another one. This one has a shift. What's our midline? Hey, there's nothing out there. Okay, no problem. So that means it's a 0. What's my amplitude? There's nothing there, so automatically it's a 1. What's my period? Pi over b. What's in front of the x? It's a 2, so pi over 2. All right. So now, remember, we're not going to divide by 4. We're going to cut it in half. So pi over 2. Multiply that by 1/2. That's going to give us pi over 4. All right, cool. So what do? That means 1, 2, 3, 4. This means pi over 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative pi over 4 here. And here they are. Okay. Here are my asymptotes. Okay. And then from there, what's half of this guy? Well, you multiply this guy by 1/2, so then it's going to give you pi over 8. That means this guy is over here going to be negative pi over 8. Great. What's my horizontal shift? Okay. It is taking the inside, 2x minus pi over 2, set that equal to 0. That means when I take the pi over 2 to the right, it's going to be positive pi over 2. We're going to divide. Dividing is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. X is equal to pi over 4. Cool. That means we're going to move it pi over 4 units to the right. Okay, we're going to move it pi over 4 units to the right. Nice. So let's go ahead and start graphing. What's our midline? Our middle, it's 0. Okay, cool. So we're going to start right here. Now, by the time I get here, I need to beat the amplitude. What's my amplitude? It's a 1. Let's say 1 is right here. I'm going every 2. And let's say that's -1. All right, so from here, right, by the time I get to the pi over 8, I should be at the amplitude. And by the time I get to negative pi over 8, I should be at the amplitude. So for this guy, okay, it should look something like this. Here, and I'm doing it in black and dotted just because I know I'm going to have to shift it. That's what it normally looks like, right? But I have to move this guy pi over 4 units to the right. Well, then that means this whole thing is going to move. Okay, so now how do I do that? Well, I just keep counting. 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, let's see here. 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8. This one would be 3 pi over 8. You see how it's every 2? It's every 2. So that's how I can tell. So 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8. What is this one? 4 pi over 8. Okay. And then if you want to keep going as well, but I ran out of room. Okay. So if you notice, the asymptote is every pi over 4. So you see how every 2? So here's my asymptote. My next asymptote wouldn't be this guy. It would be the next guy here. So here's my next asymptote. You just got to follow the pattern. You just got to follow the pattern. So now we got to move it. So this guy's going to move pi over 4 to the right. Okay, well, if you notice, this is 1 pi over 8, right? So that means we got to move 2 of them. Same thing here. This guy is at 0, pi over 4. That means this guy's going to be over here. It's moving 2 steps. This guy, 1, 2, right here. And then this guy, 1, 2, over here. Okay. So then, also my asymptote, okay. And my asymptote is going to be right here. 1, 2. You see this guy is now going to be also an asymptote right here. Right here. This guy's going to be my new asymptote because I also, okay, I also have to move the asymptotes. Okay, and this is my asymptote right here. So this guy does this, like this. So this guy moved here. So you notice I had to move the asymptotes as well. Okay, and I had to move the points as well. All right, guys. Let's see if we can do one more. Okay. Throw in a fraction there for you guys. All right, what's my midline? My midline is -1. Okay, cool. What's my amplitude? The number in front of the tangent, that's a 2. What's my period? Pi over, in front of the x, 1/2. Wow. Well, remember, dividing is the same thing as multiplied by the reciprocal. So what's the reciprocal of 1/2? The reciprocal is 2. So this guy is 2 pi. Okay. Now remember, take the period, cut it in half. Because half of the graph is on the right, half of the graph is on the left. Cool. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4 is pi. 1, 2, 3, 4 is -pi. So then right here we have our asymptote. There it is right here. And same thing over here, our asymptote. Okay, nice. Well, how do I figure out the other 4 quadrants? Take half of this guy, multiply the pi by 1/2. That means that's going to give you pi over 2. That means this guy is negative pi over 2. Cool. Now, let's do our horizontal shift just real quick. 1/2 x, set it equal to 0. Okay, that means x is going to equal to 0 as well. So that means there's no horizontal shift on this guy as well. No horizontal shift. All right, so now where do we start? We start at our midline, okay, at our middle. So now this guy starts at -1. So here's -1 right here. Let's just say that's -1. Just so it's not so kind of bunched up in there. So from here, by the time I get to here, I need to be at the amplitude. What's my amplitude? 2. So from here, okay, you're going to go up 1. Remember, I'm counting every 2. 1, 2. That means it's going to be up here. And by the time I get over here, I should be down 2 units. So 1, 2. Right there. Okay. And then I have no horizontal shift, so I can go ahead and just finish graphing it. Just like that. All right, guys. And you can also verify, if we plug in 0, you should end up with a 1. And it does. All right, guys. So hopefully that makes some sense, and good luck.